The parking lot buzzed with post-graduation chaos. Caps tossed in the air, proud parents shouting names, when billionaire Cassian Vale froze mid-step. Across the crowd, holding hands with a young woman in a graduation gown, stood his ex-lover. And when the girl smiled, he saw it. His own unmistakable smile staring back at him. Cassian Vale had arrived at the high school graduation with the same calculated discretion he brought to every public appearance that wasn't on the business calendar. A black sedan with tinted windows had dropped him at the far end of the lot, away from the main crowd. He wasn't here as the billionaire whose signature could move markets. He was here as a silent benefactor. The school's science wing, with its gleaming new labs, bore his name thanks to a donation he'd made 2 years earlier. The principal had invited him to attend the ceremony, and he had agreed, thinking it would be a simple gesture, nothing more. He never expected the day to pull the ground from under his feet. He stood under the shade of a broad maple, a paper cup of cheap lemonade in hand, scanning the crowd without any particular focus. Families clustered in groups, the air filled with bursts of laughter and the click of cameras. Students in maroon gowns hugged each other tightly, tossing caps into the air while proud parents strained for the perfect photo. Cassian felt removed from it all, as if he were watching from behind a pane of glass. He had long accepted that his life didn't allow for moments like these, at least not without a PR team orchestrating them. Then he saw her, Janelle Rhodes. Time had altered her, in the way it changes those who have fought too many quiet battles. There was more gravity in her posture, more guarded strength in her eyes. But it was her, without question. The last time he had seen her, she had been standing in the doorway of a modest apartment, refusing to meet his gaze, telling him in a voice sharp from hurt that she couldn't do this anymore. She had left with nothing but a suitcase, and he had let her go, convincing himself it was the right thing for them both. Beside her stood a young woman in a graduation gown, the maroon fabric swaying around her legs, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She laughed at something Janelle said, and when her lips curved, Cassian's heart stopped. The dimple in her left cheek, the slight tilt of her smile, it was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. For a moment the sound of the parking lot dulled into a low hum, and all he could hear was the rush of his own pulse. He knew that smile. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The girl's eyes met his across the lot, warm brown, curious, unguarded, and Cassian felt a disorienting pull in his chest. Janelle noticed his stare and stiffened instantly, her hand tightening around the girl's. She leaned down, said something Cassian couldn't hear, and the girl tilted her head in question. Janelle answered her without looking up. Cassian didn't need to read her lips to know she had said something like, "It's no one important." But then the girl spoke. Cassian saw her mouth move, and Janelle's jaw tightened. Against all logic, he stepped forward, each footfall feeling heavier than the last. When he reached them, close enough to smell the faint citrus perfume Janelle used to wear, he said her name quietly, almost testing if it would still feel the same on his tongue. She didn't flinch. "Hello, Cassian," she said, her tone flat and measured. "And you must be—" he began, but the girl answered for herself. "I'm Ivy," she said brightly. "You're Cassian Vale, right? The one who funded the artificial heart lab for kids?" Cassian nodded, unable to speak. "Thanks for doing that for other people's kids," she added with a small smile. Her words hit harder than any accusation. He realized in that instant he had no idea who this girl truly was to him, but his gut already knew the truth. They ended up sitting on a weathered bench at the far edge of the parking lot, where the noise of the celebration was dulled by distance. A half-deflated silver balloon shaped like a seahorse bobbed lazily on its ribbon beside them, forgotten by some other family. Cassian sat angled toward Janelle, though she kept her posture straight, her hands resting on her knees, as if ready to stand and leave at any moment. Ivy lingered a few steps away, taking pictures of her classmates, glancing at them now and then with mild curiosity. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," Janelle said finally, her voice cool but not openly hostile. "This isn't exactly your kind of crowd." "It was supposed to be a quiet visit," Cassian replied, his tone softer than he intended. "I came because the principal invited me. I didn't know you—" He stopped himself, the words snagging in his throat. "You'd be here." Her lips tightened at that, as if she could hear the unspoken ending. With her. Silence settled between them for a moment. Cassian's eyes drifted toward Ivy, who was now laughing with a friend, her head thrown back in a way that made something twist sharply in his chest. He remembered being told once, long ago, that his smile was impossible to forget. Seeing it now, his own expression living on the face of a girl who had never met him, was disarming in a way he couldn't quite name. "She's yours, isn't she?" The question came out quieter than he intended, almost an admission rather than an accusation. Janelle's shoulders tensed. "Her name is Ivy. She's 18. She's graduating, and we're leaving after this." Her voice was steady, but there was a warning in it, a boundary she wasn't sure she wanted him to cross. Cassian exhaled slowly. "If I'd known—" "You didn't!" she cut in sharply. "And it doesn't matter now." But it did matter. It mattered in a way that made his chest feel tight, like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at years he could never get back. He thought of the last time they'd spoken, how he had let her walk away because his father and his lawyers had convinced him it was for the best. How he had told himself that sacrificing her was necessary to protect his company's image ahead of an IPO. At the time, he had believed he was choosing the future. Now, sitting here, it felt like he had chosen an empty shell. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thin, creased envelope. "I've carried this for 10 years," he said, holding it between them. "I wrote it the night after you left. I never sent it. I told myself it was too late." Janelle didn't take the envelope. She looked at it as though it were a weapon, not a letter. "There are things you can't fix by showing up with words from the past," she said quietly. "I know," he admitted. Ivy turned toward them then, smiling as she jogged over. "They're taking a group photo. Mom, you coming?" she asked. "In a minute," Janelle replied. Ivy looked between them, her eyes lingering on Cassian. "It was nice meeting you," she said politely, then added with a grin, "You have a familiar smile." Cassian's pulse stuttered. "So do you," he answered, his voice low. She tilted her head, amused but puzzled, before running back toward the crowd. When she was gone, Janelle finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Don't start something you can't see through, Cassian. I've kept her safe this long." "I'm not here to take her from you," he said, "but I'm not walking away again." Janelle looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood. "We'll see." And she walked toward the ceremony, leaving him on the bench with the envelope still in his hand, and a storm gathering quietly inside him. 2 days later, the sound of rain against the cafe windows was steady and low, the kind of rain that made people linger over coffee. Cassian pushed open the glass door, the small brass bell above it ringing a thin note, and scanned the narrow room. Janelle sat near the back, her hair pulled into a neat twist, a folder lying on the table in front of her. She wasn't reading it. Her gaze was fixed on the window, where rivulets of water distorted the view of the street outside. She didn't greet him when he approached, didn't rise. "You came," she said simply, as if she'd been half expecting him anyway. "You called," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment they just looked at each other. The air between them felt charged, heavy with years of unsaid things. Finally she flipped open the folder. Inside were plastic sleeves holding pages that looked decades old, contracts, signed agreements, legal statements. The top sheet was a photocopy, the ink slightly faded, the company letterhead unmistakable. Vale Global Holdings. "You should read this," Janelle said, her voice clipped. Cassian took the page and scanned it. The legal language was precise and cold, the kind of thing designed to bury meaning under layers of formality. But one paragraph pulled him up short. It detailed a non-disclosure and non-contact agreement, tied to the acknowledgement of pregnancy involving a company principal, his name nowhere, but the references unmistakable. And then he saw the clause. In the event of any claim of paternity, the company reserved the right to initiate a custody challenge in the best interest of the child's future, which in practice meant complete removal from the mother. He read it twice, disbelief tightening in his chest. This, my father? Janelle nodded once. He came to me when you were in Zurich, right after you left for that big investor summit. He said I had two choices: sign this and raise my child without interference, or fight and watch a team of lawyers dismantle my life. He promised I'd lose, and I believed him. Cassian set the paper down slowly, as though it were something fragile that might splinter in his hands. I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea this existed. Her expression didn't soften. I thought maybe you did. And if you didn't, I thought maybe you didn't care enough to find out. He felt that accusation like a blade, because he remembered how quickly he'd let the distance grow between them back then, how easily he had convinced himself it was for her benefit. He thought of those days as strategic. Now they just looked like cowardice. I believed you left because I wasn't enough, she said, her voice low. That you'd decided love was too messy for the man you wanted to be. I left because I let him make me believe that loving you would destroy everything I was building, he admitted, the words tasting bitter. And I was wrong. Janelle closed the folder, her hand still resting on it like it was a shield. Ivy doesn't know the truth. She's never asked about her father. I didn't want her to grow up feeling abandoned or unworthy. Cassian nodded slowly. She deserves to know, but not if you're not ready for that. Before she could answer, the bell above the door chimed again. Ivy came in, shaking rain from her braid, a book clutched under one arm. She spotted them and smiled. Mom, the bus was slow. Oh, hey, Mr. Vale. Cassian, he corrected gently. She slid into the seat beside Janelle, setting her book down. You guys having a meeting or something? Janelle hesitated. Something like that. Cassian glanced at the folder, then back at Ivy. We were just catching up. Ivy nodded, oblivious to the undercurrent between them. Cool. Hey, Mom, do we still have to go to the clinic next week? Coach wants me at training. Janelle's hand tightened on the folder, her voice careful. Yes, we're keeping that appointment. Cassian didn't know why, but something in the way she said it sent a ripple of unease through him. He had a feeling that this wasn't the last difficult conversation they were going to have. That uneasy ripple returned with full force a week later, when Cassian's phone lit up with Janelle's name just after dusk. Her voice on the other end was tight, hurried. It's Ivy. She collapsed at practice. We're at St. Vincent's cardiology wing. There was no room for questions in her tone, only urgency. By the time he reached the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the muted beeping of machines were already settling into his nerves. He found them in a curtained bay off the main corridor. Ivy lay on the narrow bed, a pale hospital blanket pulled up to her chest. Her skin looked ashen, a stark contrast to the bright graduation day Cassian still had fresh in his mind. A thin oxygen tube curved around her cheeks, her breath shallow but steady. Janelle sat beside her, gripping her hand like a lifeline, her own face drawn and pale. The attending physician, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, met Cassian at the foot of the bed. She's been living with a congenital valve defect, he explained quietly. From what we gather, it's been monitored, but it's worsened more quickly than expected. The stress from athletic activity likely triggered the collapse. She needs surgical intervention soon. How soon? Cassian asked, his voice low but firm. As in within days, the doctor replied. We're running additional imaging now, but this isn't something that can wait. Cassian looked to Janelle, whose eyes flickered with guilt. You knew? He asked, not accusingly, but with an edge of disbelief. I knew she had a condition, she said softly. We've been doing checkups since she was little. The doctors thought we had time. I didn't tell you because—" her voice caught, "because you weren't part of her life, and I didn't know if I wanted you to be." Before Cassian could respond, a nurse entered to wheel Ivy toward diagnostics. Janelle stood, still holding her daughter's hand until the bed rolled past the curtain. The silence that followed was thick, filled with the unspoken truth that they were no longer talking about choice, they were talking about survival. In the small waiting area outside the ward, Cassian turned to Janelle. "You said you've been keeping her safe, but safety doesn't mean shutting people out when you need help." "I've been protecting her from things you can't buy your way out of," she said, her tone sharp. "Your father made sure of that once already. Do you have any idea how much I had to navigate alone? Every bill, every test, every scare." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then let me stand here now. Don't fight me on this. If she needs the best team in the country, I'll get them here tonight." "It's not just about money," she snapped. "It's about legal authority. If the surgery has risks, if decisions have to be made in the middle of it, right now you have no rights. I'm her mother. It's my call." "Then give me the ability to make it with you," he said, and there was no mistaking the plea in his voice. She hesitated, looking away. That was when a third voice broke into the conversation. "You two want to save your daughter?" It was a woman in navy scrubs, a badge clipped to her chest, Amara Ellison, the nurse coordinator. She had a steady, matter-of-fact gaze. "Then stop arguing and listen. She's 18, which means she can consent to you both having medical decision rights. I can get the forms, but you'd better decide before she's wheeled into the OR." Cassian and Janelle locked eyes, both realizing at the same time that this was no longer about past grievances. It was about whether they could stand in the same room, as equals, for the girl in that hospital bed. And whether they were ready or not, the clock had already started ticking. The forms arrived in a thin plastic clipboard, the kind that seemed far too flimsy for something so heavy. Amara set it down on the small table between them, her voice even but urgent. "This is a temporary joint medical decision agreement," she explained. "If Ivy signs, you both will be able to approve anything the surgical team needs during the operation. No delays, no waiting for court orders." Janelle's eyes stayed on the paperwork, her fingers tracing the edge of the page without turning it. Cassian picked up the pen immediately. "Where do I sign?" "Not yet," Amara said. "She has to sign first, and I'll need to witness it. She's still in imaging right now, so you have a few minutes to get on the same page." Cassian turned to Janelle, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to push you out. I want to be here because she's my daughter. I've lost too much time already." "That's exactly my fear," Janelle replied quietly. "You swoop in, take over, and leave me standing on the sidelines. I've fought for her every single day without you." "And I'm not asking you to stop fighting," he said. "I'm asking you to let me fight with you." Before she could answer, Ivy was wheeled back into the curtained space, her gown slightly askew from the scans, her hair messy against the pillow. She looked tired but alert. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice a little hoarse. Amara stepped closer, speaking in that calm, practical tone that cut through confusion. "Ivy, you're 18, so legally you get to decide who can make medical decisions for you if something happens during surgery. You can keep that power just with your mom, or you can add your dad here so they both can decide together." Ivy blinked. "My dad?" She glanced at Cassie and then back to her mother. "Is that true?" Janelle hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yes, this is Cassian Vale. He's your father." The air felt charged, heavy with the weight of that revelation. Ivy looked between them again, her expression unreadable. "Why am I finding this out now?" Janelle swallowed. "Because I thought I was protecting you. But right now, protecting you means letting him help." Cassian stepped forward, careful not to overwhelm her. "I know this is a lot. You don't have to call me anything, you don't even have to like me. But I want you to be safe, and I can help make that happen." Ivy studied him for a moment, then took the clipboard from Amara. She signed her name slowly, deliberately, then handed it to her mother. Janelle signed next, and finally Cassian's signature joined theirs, his pen strokes firm despite the adrenaline humming in his veins. Amara checked the forms, nodding. "All right, I'll file this right now. The surgical team is prepping. You'll both be called in before she goes under." As the nurse left, Ivy sank back against her pillow, her gaze still flicking between them. "Guess today's full of surprises," she murmured, a faint wry smile playing at her lips. Cassian managed a small smile in return, but inside the truth was sharper. The hardest part wasn't over. It was only beginning, and now every decision, every second, mattered more than anything else in his life. The hours leading up to the surgery felt like a slow-motion storm. Cassian and Janelle were moved to a small family consultation room, its beige walls and generic paintings doing nothing to quiet the tension. A pot of lukewarm coffee sat untouched on the counter. Every so often, footsteps and the distant roll of gurneys passed in the hallway, each sound making Janelle's head snap up, as if she could will the doctors to appear sooner. Amara returned with a folder of surgical consent papers and a calmness that seemed to anchor the room. "Dr. Keaton will be leading the procedure," she said. "He's one of the top cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. Cassian, you'll be glad to know he's flown in specialists for complex valve reconstruction cases before. Your daughter will have the best." "Our daughter," Cassian corrected quietly, meeting Janelle's eyes for a brief, charged moment. The door opened again and Dr. Keaton stepped in. Tall, silver-haired, with the brisk efficiency of someone used to holding lives in his hands, he shook both their hands before laying out the plan. "We'll replace the faulty valve with a bioprosthetic one. It's delicate work, especially with the scar tissue we expect to find, but I'm confident. The surgery will take 3 to 4 hours. There's a risk of arrhythmia during the procedure, but we'll have everything in place to handle it." Janelle's fingers were white-knuckled around the armrest of her chair. "And after? She'll need monitoring, medication to prevent clotting, and months of follow-up. But if all goes well, she can return to a normal, active life." When he left, Amara handed them surgical gowns, explaining they could see Ivy before she was taken into the operating room. The sight of her lying on the pre-op bed, hair tucked under a disposable cap, made Cassian's throat tighten. Ivy looked younger somehow, her usual sharp, confident energy replaced by quiet focus. "You look like you're about to run a board meeting," she said, eyeing the way he stood at her bedside. "I've never been this nervous at a board meeting," he admitted. Janelle bent down to kiss her forehead, her voice steady despite the tremor Cassian could hear beneath it. "You're going to be fine. They know what they're doing." Ivy looked at both of them. "So, I guess this is what having two parents feels like. Weird timing." Her tone was light, but her eyes searched Cassian's face, as if trying to decide what kind of man he really was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. An old silver pendant shaped like a maple leaf, worn smooth with years. "This was supposed to be yours a long time ago," he said, placing it gently in her palm. "You don't have to keep it if you don't want to, but I'd like you to have it while you're in there." Ivy closed her fingers around it. "Guess it's good luck then." The anesthesiologist arrived, signaling it was time. As they began to wheel her toward the OR, she lifted her hand in a small wave. "See you on the other side." Cassian and Janelle stood side by side as the doors closed behind her. Their reflections caught for a brief moment in the glass panels. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, they were united by something stronger than the past, by the fragile, urgent hope that the girl they both loved would come back to them alive. The waiting room outside the operating theaters had the sterile stillness of a place where time didn't move in minutes but in heartbeats. Cassian sat forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor tiles as if they might offer answers. Janelle sat beside him, her posture rigid, hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles were pale. Neither spoke for the first hour. The occasional muffled announcement over the intercom, or the shuffle of shoes in the corridor felt like intrusions into their fragile bubble of anxiety. Amara came by twice, checking on them, her voice steady. "The surgery is progressing as planned," she assured them each time. But Cassian knew that meant little. Planned could still mean dangerous. Every scenario the surgeon had described replayed in his mind, each one ending with a different outcome. He hated feeling powerless. In business, if something went wrong, he could act, decide, pivot. Here, all he could do was wait. At the 90-minute mark, a junior nurse entered and handed Amara a folded note. She read it, then approached them. "They've reached the valve and confirmed the severity. There's more scar tissue than expected, but Dr. Keaton says they're proceeding with the replacement." Janelle closed her eyes, breathing in slowly as if steadying herself. Cassian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Scar tissue? How does that even happen in someone her age?" Janelle glanced at him. "From living with something broken for too long," she said softly. Another hour passed. Cassian got up and paced, his steps silent on the worn carpet. He paused at the vending machine, staring blankly at the rows of snacks, not because he was hungry, but because he needed somewhere to put his eyes. Janelle joined him there unexpectedly. "Ivy's tough," she said, her voice quieter now, almost conversational. "When she was little, she'd come home scraped up from climbing fences and still insist she wasn't hurt. She hates showing weakness. She gets that from you," he said without thinking. Janelle's gaze flickered toward him, but before she could respond, the double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Dr. Keaton stepped through, still in his surgical cap, his face partially hidden behind a mask pulled down to his chin. Cassian's heart dropped into his stomach as they both rushed toward him. "There was a difficult moment," the surgeon began, his voice calm, but edged with the weight of what he'd seen. "At about the 40-minute mark of the valve replacement, her heart rhythm became unstable. We had to shock her back into a safe rhythm and stabilize her blood pressure, but she responded well. The new valve is in place and functioning. She's stable now, and we're closing." The relief was so sharp Cassian felt almost dizzy. Janelle covered her mouth, her eyes wet. "She'll be in recovery soon," Dr. Keaton continued. "The next 24 hours will be critical for monitoring, but I'm optimistic." Cassian thanked him, his voice rough. When they sat down again, the tension that had been coiled so tightly between them seemed to loosen just enough for them to breathe. "She came back," Janelle whispered, as if saying it aloud made it real. Cassian looked at her, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could all come back from this. Ivy woke in the soft glow of the recovery ward, the steady beep of the heart monitor a quiet counterpoint to her first shallow breaths. Cassian was sitting at her bedside, leaning forward in the chair with his forearms resting on his knees, watching her as if the mere act of keeping his eyes on her would guarantee she stayed there. Janelle stood on the other side, her hand wrapped gently around Ivy's, her thumb brushing over her knuckles in slow, rhythmic strokes. When Ivy's eyes fluttered open, she squinted at the brightness for a moment before focusing on their faces. "Still here?" she murmured, her voice rasping. "Not going anywhere," Cassian said, his tone low but steady. Janelle smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's forehead. "The surgery went well. Dr. Keaton says your new valve is working perfectly." Ivy's gaze drifted between them, and for the first time since the truth had been laid bare, she didn't look guarded. "Guess you both really are my parents," she whispered. "You've always been ours," Janelle said, her voice trembling just enough for Cassian to notice. Over the next few days, Ivy's strength began to return. Cassian was there for every doctor's update, every vitals check, every slow walk down the hallway with the physical therapist. He kept his phone in his pocket, ignoring the constant vibration of messages and calls from his office. Business could wait. He had already informed his board that his priorities had shifted, and for once, he meant it without hesitation. One afternoon, as the late sun spilled warm light into the room, Ivy pulled out her phone and opened an app she had been working on before graduation. "I was building this," she said, turning the screen toward them. "A platform for small grants to help students without families get on their feet. Security deposits, first month's rent, even health insurance. I didn't know how I was going to fund it." Cassian studied the interface for a moment before looking at her. "You don't have to figure that out alone. We'll fund it, we'll build the infrastructure, and you'll run it. No strings. It'll be your vision, your leadership." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "We?" Cassian met her gaze evenly. "If we're going to make up for lost time, I think it's going to take more than just me showing up at a hospital. It has to be something that lasts." Ivy smiled faintly, then looked at her mother. "I'm okay with that, if you are." Janelle hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I am, as long as this isn't just another project for you, Cassian. She's not a quarterly report." "She's my daughter," he said simply. 3 weeks later, they were standing together at the opening of the new initiative, Maple and Dawn, named for the pendant Cassian had given Ivy, and the idea of a new beginning. The modest office was filled with photographs of students whose futures were already changing. Amara was there too, watching from the corner with quiet pride. As the small crowd dispersed, Ivy approached Cassian, holding the silver maple leaf pendant in her palm. "I'm keeping this," she said, "but I think it should be the logo for Maple and Dawn, so everyone knows it means starting over and surviving." Cassian felt something shift deep in his chest, the weight of years of distance replaced by the solid ground of the present. Janelle was beside him, her hand brushing his briefly as Ivy moved ahead to greet one of the first grant recipients. For the first time in decades, he wasn't looking back at what he'd lost. He was standing in what he had, and it was more than he ever thought he'd get. What makes the ending of this story powerful is not just that Ivy survives the surgery, or that Cassian finally steps into the role of a father. It's that all three of them arrive at a place where the past no longer holds them hostage. The reconciliation isn't painted as a perfect fairy tale. There's an acknowledgement that years were lost, and those years can't be returned. But the choice to create something new together, Maple and Dawn, transforms their shared pain into a shared purpose. I like that the ending is grounded in action rather than sentiment alone. Cassian doesn't redeem himself with apologies or grand speeches. He redeems himself by showing up, by staying, and by building something that extends beyond his own family. Janelle's acceptance isn't instant, but it's earned through consistent commitment. And Ivy's willingness to connect with her father comes from seeing him not as the man who left, but as the man who is here now. It's a hopeful resolution that doesn't deny the weight of what came before. The happy ending feels earned because it's not about erasing the pain. It's about building a future where that pain no longer defines them. In that way, the conclusion is both emotionally satisfying and believable, offering a kind of closure that feels lasting.